First of all, let me thank Professor Kumar, Professor Bishnoi, Professor Malhotra, Professor Ramesh Chand to invite me to deliver the chief guest address in this August session. Really thankful to all of you to consider me and giving me this opportunity to talk about the economic revitalization situation and challenges in key sectors. I'm very fortunate that in this session, just before me, I've had the privilege to listen to such highly rated and well-researched pieces by my predecessor panelists. They've all spoken on various aspects of the economy, well-researched, highly documented, and therefore I will, in my address, skip those. Also keeping in mind the time frame that we had, I thought I will not go over the issues that they have already flagged. So I'll skip those and only cover some more issues. And then I have some thoughts which I thought I would like to share with all of you. Yes, you are right. There has been a debate in the country. It's going to be a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery. It has been discussed by my panelists. But then something new has happened. While rest of the world is grappling with a second wave, a new variant of the virus has come up. And therefore, we do not know what is going to happen. And unfortunately, the new variant is not only coming from one single country, it seems the variant is mutated and is now coming out with different versions from different parts of the world. Now that makes the vaccine more challenging. And therefore, if there is going to be a new round of lockdowns and new round of the situation that we have just passed in 2020, then 2021 could be a very big challenge. We have to, as economists, as policymakers, keep that in mind now. The second issue that I would like to flag, yes, inflation is raising its head. And the dichotomy between the wholesale price index and the consumer price index is emerging very, very clearly. The WPI is around 1.55 for general and nearly 4.3 for food. The CPI, on the other hand, is 6.9 for general and 9.53 for food. The widening gap between the WPI and the CPI is also a cause of concern. And just not too far earlier, as was mentioned by one of the panelists, we only adopted inflation targeting in 2016. We were following WPI. And now that's becoming a cause of concern. In the month of October, IIP is certainly showing a good, healthy trend. My own feeling, having worked in the Reserve Bank for such a long time and gone through the time when the policy used to be made for a busy period and a lean period, and the busy period is basically the festival period. We are in the midst of the festival period. This is the time when many marriages take place in India. We have festivals one after the other. Christmas and New Year is just, we are in the midst of it. Then will come Holi and then will come Lodi. And these festivals bring in enthusiasm. And my feeling is, as the second quarter results surprised many cynics of Indian economy, the third and the fourth quarter results are also going to surprise them. The reason is simple. The Indians, by their very nature, are hardworking. There's been pent-up demand. There's pent-up consumption. And as the unlocking of the economy happens, I am sure the recovery is going to rebound and we'll recover faster. I am again aware that there are uncertainties because of the new variant and the second wave coming. But given the vaccination on the screen and also that the herd mentality and the climate changes in our part of the world, and given our dietary habits, I think we are going to record positive growth by the time 2021 third quarter is there. The predictions made by the IMF and ADB and other institutions have all been revised upwards after our performance of the second quarter of 2020. I think those upward revisions will improve further in days to come. To that extent, I would like to thank the policymakers, both in the government at the union level as well as at the state level, that they have been able to contain the COVID to this extent. Now, I would like to go a little further and say if we want to revitalize the economy, and not only in 21-22, but we have in mind the $5 trillion economy, a target set by our Prime Minister, and as discussed by my panelists, that by 2025, by 2030 and 2035, we should be able to overcome the economies of Germany and Japan. So we need to gallop forward. And in that context, I want to spend the next few minutes. As economists, we all know two things are necessary to grow: labor and capital. India is endowed with a very young demographic labor. Skilling of it has already been done and is being done by the government, both at the union and at the state level. The health challenge which has come, again, we see that there is the seriousness with which the health challenge is being discussed, and the plan, the roadmap of how the vaccine comes and the country will be vaccinated. I'm going to today focus on the capital part, because the labor part, in my mind, to a great extent, has been taken care and is being taken care by the union and the state governments. In this, I want to tap my own experience, which has been articulated by Professor Bishnoi, mentioning that I have had the privilege to get associated with the very best policymaking institutions, both in the country in RBI and across the world at the International Monetary Fund, and with the academic institutions, the Department of Economics at Harvard University and Economics Department and the Stanford Center for International Development at Stanford University. The privilege of studying at Harvard for about a year was that I could easily go into the Kennedy School of Government, totally policy oriented, and the MIT, totally academic, and to some extent, the Harvard Business School, looking at the business world in a different way. I want to tap that experience. And with that experience, I want to make a few observations. I want to discuss three things amongst ourselves, we, the family of economists. We are the Indian Economic Association, and now I'm talking to the family of economists. No finger pointing. I am part of the system, and therefore, I thought I'll be very frank and candid in this discussion. If we have to revitalize the economy, and if we have to compete the target set by the Prime Minister, immediate target, and those discussed by we economists in terms of 2025, 2035, we cannot ignore the private sector. We will have to think and go beyond the sociology, the socialist economy ideology or mixed ideology that we had and pursued for so many years. We have to compete, then we have to compete in the right spirit. And the capitalist world, while we were still toying with this idea of the mixed ideology, has marched forward to achieve those dizzy heights, and first to compete with a $20 US economy today and a $13 trillion Chinese economy. No stone has to be left unturned. No stone, even that which is in the private sector. The legacy, considering everything that is private is bad and evil, I think should be of the past. And we economists have a role to play in it. The forward movement of the economy is only possible if private sector can play an important role in development of infrastructure, which they have started, and investing in key sectors. It is now the turn of the agriculture sector. And we economists have to analyze it in terms of the required capital and the available capital and the labor in that sector. In my view, we economists have a very important role to play in this case. Economists could have worked, and I'm one of them, could have worked on the MSP and main beneficiaries of MSP, need for a balanced model in agrarian-dominated states, futuristic course of development, etc., for various states in the country. Some of us did, some of us did not. We could have done better. Some of us shied away. If I were in another country, in America, for example, 10, 15 economists would have got together and come out with their view. We didn't in our country. We shied away. But before the independence, there was a Bombay Club, which would come out their own thoughts. And there was another clubs which would come out with their own thoughts. I think we need to evolve as a tribe and start saying things which we are convinced of, or the literature or our training has taught us. The second point which I want to make and flows from this is the area of non-banking financial sector, non-banking financial companies. I am focusing on capital. Just visualize a situation. The Reserve Bank of India, global central bank with vast experience, and I can tell you because I worked there. The commercial banks, again with vast experience, with multinational branches, and I worked in Punjab National Bank before I joined the Reserve Bank. And now I have the privilege and honor to serve as a chairman of Punjab and Sindh Bank. These banks, commercial public sector banks, are globally very competitive. So we have the umbrella, the Reserve Bank. We have well-developed commercial banks. We also have cooperative banks. But do you see there is a missing middle? That missing middle is the non-banking finance companies. And if we are dreaming of a $5 trillion economy, this missing middle has to be addressed. In India, NBFCs account only for 13% of the financial sector assets. In America, they account for 50% of the financial sector assets. They are as large as regulated commercial banks. If we are dreaming of a large $5 trillion economy, we will not be able to ignore the NBFCs. Now, to be brief on this point, the NBFCs are expected to cater to financial inclusion and retail banking. An initial analysis shows that when the NBFCs went into corporate lending, where they did not have the viability, where they did not have the expertise to assess commercial viability, those are the NBFCs which have suffered the most. When the commercial banks are entering into the retail banking, NBFCs are going to have a tough time. And if we want a $5 trillion economy or a $30 trillion economy, we cannot ignore this segment because they are largely private. No, we can't do it. The problems which the NBFCs are facing are credibility. They have lack of trained staff because there are 10,000 of them, 10,000 of NBFCs operating in the country. They are a black box. If they were not, the rating agencies would not have fumbled on the NBFCs the way they fumbled in India, and of course abroad too. And they don't have even a self-regulatory body. Given these four problems, let me move on. What is the future of NBFCs when we are talking of revitalizing the economy? The 10,000 NBFCs that we see today will have to undergo major changes. Why? Because technology is playing a very prominent role across the world, even in India. And these NBFCs, are they ready for technological revolution? Are they ready for fintech? And when we talk of fintech, we are talking of the mobile banking, which the commercial banks have gone in a big way. And we are talking of peer-to-peer lending. The role of technology and the fintech in NBFCs has to play a role. And I don't think we are ready with it. Now let me come to the recommendation that I have on this. The research on NBFCs is lacking dramatically. the role of NBFCs, the suitable size, the sectors, all lacking. Therefore, I'm suggesting from this forum that we need a separate and a dedicated institution like the NIBM or College for Agriculture Banking, both set up 50 years ago in the banking sector and the cooperative banking sector. We need some such dedicated institution for NBFCs. And this dedicated institution shall be entrusted the role of undertaking quality research on role of NBFCs, looking at the global experience and ensuring how the Indian economy turns up into a 5 or a $25 trillion economy. There is need for capacity building. There is need for standardizing the documents. And as the country goes forward, the greater role of NBFCs is bound to take place. And if we are not able to train, regulate, supervise, and bring up their standards, the chances of frauds are going to increase. Cybercrime will increase. Money laundering will increase. Therefore, I think we need to take up this challenge as economists and start undertaking research on NBFCs. And of course, we request the institution and the government and top-notch policymakers are sitting in the audience, especially Professor Mehrotra. We need to start financing research on NBFCs. The last issue that I want to touch is the fiscal issues. And therein, I find tremendous shortage, lack, inadequate research in our country. The issue is the fiscal policy. And if we have to go in a $5 trillion economy, and one of the economists just mentioned it, in days to come, it will be the fiscal policy which will play a more prominent role. Are we ready with research? 10,000 economists probably in our own country. Have we done enough research? The example of GST is important, and the need to constantly adjust the rates could be the trend. There is need, therefore, I recommend for a permanent fiscal policy committee like the Monetary Policy Committee, available for comments, suggestions, recommendations, and analysis as and when required by the center or the state government. We could have a permanent finance commission, but there is need to undertake research on the aspects, on various aspects of the fiscal policy, both on expenditure as well as on revenue, which is lacking. The other area is the financing of the deficit in these difficult times. Can somebody, open challenge, can somebody in India or abroad show me the sanctity of the figure of deficit of 3% of GDP or 60% of debt to GDP ratio? My MPhil thesis is on debt. My PhD thesis is on debt. My postdoctorate study with Robert Barrow is on debt. I have asked everybody at the highest level of the academia, as well as the policymaker, show me the sanctity of 3% and 60% of deficit and debt to GDP ratio. Don't get me wrong. I'm not speaking of fiscal profligacy. I also understand fiscal responsibility. And when the Reserve Bank was, and the government was making the fiscal responsibility bill, this fiscal responsibility and budget management bill, I was in the Reserve Bank on that side of the table and providing inputs. So don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying, in a country like India, given its young demographic, should the indicators which are really applicable to Japan, where aging takes place, be made on, imposed on India? That's the question I am making. I think there is immense scope of research to demonstrate the relationship between fiscal deficit and inflation. Show me the relationship. This is just a fear out of nothing. The only relevant indicator of sustainability of debt is in the paper by Domer, the Domer formula in the American Economic Review paper of 1944, which is plain, clear, and simple, saying what matters is the growth of the economy vis-a-vis the rate of interest on which borrowing has been undertaken. All other complexities have been added without any sanctity. Should we in our country not undertake research and say this is the threshold level for our country? Nothing has been done. Closely related to this issue is the issue of monetized deficit, which government will have to eventually resort to given the fiscal stress right now And given the uncertainties that I flagged right in the beginning, is there any relationship between monetary deficit and inflation? None. Given the empirical example of expanded balance sheet of Bank of England, Fed Reserve, Reserve Bank of Australia since 2008, the transmission mechanism in those countries is maximum 8 quarters, and their inflation never took off. And we in India are sticking to that formula. So hence, I think there is need to revisit the Cambridge equation, which may be suitable for advanced countries in normal times, but certainly was not and is not suitable for emerging countries where supply side comes and makes major difference both in normal and abnormal times. The panelists before me spoke about the rising inflation. Is it coming from money supply or is it coming from supply side? And that needs to be investigated, documented, and analyzed. If there is fragmented financial markets in India, does the Cambridge equation work here? Does the transmission policy work here? Where is the research? We have not done enough research. If there is no relationship, then should we not document that? And if there is a threshold, we revise the numbers for India. Finally, in this context, there is also need for extensive research on inflation targeting and its relevance for demographic-rich India. None else but Olivia Blanchard, professor from MIT, whom I first met him in 1993, and later when he became the chief economist at the IMF, and I had the chance to meet him again. He himself said that the inflation targeting levels adopted by the world are probably in for revision. And we in India are shy of it. In this context, should a young demographic India have a target of 4 plus minus 2? This is very relevant in the present context, where unemployment and growth must be the dominant factor. And we as leading economists in the country have to flag it out. Is it the employment that matters today, or is it the inflation figure of 4% or 6% or 8%? I invite my panelists and other economists to look at the trend of inflation trend in our country, the tolerance limit of inflation in our country, and see, should we start getting worried when inflation is 6% and unemployment is high? I think there is need to rewrite the textbooks of macroeconomics, especially for emerging countries and especially for India, because our demographic trend is just not there in any other country. And from where better than India can this start now? Let me conclude. I think that we economists in India have for too long lazily, let me repeat, I think we economists in India have for far too long lazily depended on Western hypotheses and theories without testing whether they are relevant for our country. I think time has come when we need to pull up our socks, put on our thinking turbans, and start thinking of discovering our own theories. Some Western concepts may be relevant, many will not. And we shall have the confidence to tell the world of our discovery of theories and hypotheses. Believe me, many countries like us and way behind us will benefit from our research. Truly,